My name is Grace. I am 44 years old, and I grew up in a small fishing town on the coast of South Korea called Tongyong, where the sea is everywhere, and the mornings smell like salt and dried fish, and the kind of cold that wakes you up completely before you are ready. I was the oldest of four children, which in my family meant I was the one who stayed quiet, worked hard, and never asked for more than was given. That habit followed me across an ocean and into a marriage, and through 20 years of a life I had chosen and several I had not, and it nearly cost me everything. I want to tell you about the morning I found my husband's second phone. It was a Tuesday in March, ordinary in every way. I was looking for the car keys in the kitchen drawer, the one that collects everything no one knows where to put. And underneath a takeout menu and a dead battery and 3 rubber bands was a phone I had never seen before. Black, different model than the one he used every day, no case. I picked it up the way you pick up something that doesn't immediately make sense, turning it over in my hands, and then I set it on the counter and stood there looking at it for a long time before I understood what I was looking at. My husband's name was James. We had been married for 19 years. He was an architect, American, from Cincinnati, and I had met him when I was 23, and he was 26, and we were both living in Seoul. Him on a 2-year work assignment, me working at the front desk of the firm where he was placed. He used to stop at my desk every morning on his way to the elevators and find a reason to talk to me for a few minutes. About the weather. About a restaurant he had tried the night before. About whether I thought it would rain. He was transparent in his interest in a way I found both embarrassing and flattering, because Korean men at that time did not generally behave that way, and the transparency of it felt, to my 23-year-old self, like a form of honesty. We got married after 2 years. My parents came to the wedding in Seoul, and my mother cried in the way Korean mothers cry at weddings, which involves a great deal of composure being maintained at significant personal cost. My father shook James's hand for a very long time without speaking, which was his way of saying he trusted him. We moved to Cincinnati the following year, into a neighborhood of quiet streets and large trees that turned extraordinary colors in October, and that felt, in those first months, like living inside a painting I didn't quite belong to. My English was good but not natural yet, the kind that requires concentration. I spent the first year in Cincinnati mostly at home, learning the rhythms of the neighborhood, cooking, building a life around James's schedule while I figured out what mine was going to look like. I found a job at a Korean American community center, teaching language classes and helping with translation services. I made friends slowly, the way immigrants do, through proximity and shared experience, rather than through the easy chemistry of people who grew up speaking the same cultural shorthand. We had 2 children. Our son Marcus came first, then our daughter Yuna 3 years later, named for my grandmother back in Tongyong who never made it to America, and who I still call every Sunday, even though she is 91 and sometimes forgets who I am mid-conversation and then remembers again and picks up exactly where she left off, as if nothing happened. Our children grew up between two cultures in the way that children of immigrants always do, belonging fully to neither and to both, code switching between languages and identities with a fluency that still amazes me. The life James and I built was a good one. I want to say that clearly because it is true, and because I think people telling stories like mine sometimes skip over the good parts to get to the dramatic parts, and I don't want to do that. We were genuinely good partners for a long time. He was involved with the children in a way that not all fathers of his generation were. He remembered my parents' birthdays and sent gifts to Korea twice a year without being reminded. He supported my work at the community center, even when it meant dinners were late or weekends were interrupted. There was real warmth between us for many years. I don't know exactly when it started changing. This is the honest answer, the one I resisted for a long time because I wanted a clearer story, a moment I could point to. But the change was gradual, like the tide going out so slowly you don't notice the water is lower until the rocks are showing. He started working later. He seemed distracted in a way that I attributed to stress at the firm, which was going through a difficult period with a major contract. He became slightly absent in conversations, present in the room but somewhere else in his attention. And when I asked if everything was all right, he always said yes, fine, just tired. I believed him for longer than I should have because I wanted to believe him, and because I had spent 19 years trusting this man, and because trust, once it has been a habit that long, is very hard to interrupt, even when something quiet in you is beginning to suggest that you should. The second phone on the kitchen counter interrupted it. I left it where it was, and I drove the kids to school, and I went to work, and I sat at my desk and I taught a language class for 2 hours. And all the while there was a voice in the back of my mind that was doing the particular kind of calculating that you do when you already know something but haven't yet let yourself know that you know. When I got home that afternoon, the phone was still there. James was still at work. I picked it up. It wasn't locked. I am not going to describe in detail what I found on that phone. I will tell you that it was a woman in Chicago. I will tell you that it had been going on for 14 months. I will tell you that the messages contained things I will never be able to unread, things that made it clear this was not casual or careless, but deliberate and sustained. Something James had been actively choosing for over a year while sitting across from me at dinner, and lying in the bed next to me at night, and shaking my father's hand at our daughter's birthday video call last November, when my parents tuned in from Korea. I put the phone back in the drawer. I made dinner. I helped Yuna with her homework and listened to Marcus tell me about a situation with his friend group that required my full attention and a careful response. And when James came home at 7:30, I looked at his face and said, "How was your day?" And he said, "Fine. Long. You know how it is." And I said, "Yes," and put a plate in front of him. I did not say anything for 4 days. I want to explain this because I think people who haven't been in a situation like that sometimes don't understand why a person doesn't say something immediately, why they wait. But I had 2 children in that house, one of them 13 and one of them 16, and I needed to understand what I was going to do before I blew open the structure of their daily lives. I am my mother's daughter. I needed to think first. On the fourth day, I called my closest friend in Cincinnati, a woman named Patricia, who I had met at the community center 8 years earlier, and who is the kind of friend who picks up the phone at any hour and says what she actually thinks, rather than what you want to hear. I told her what I had found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What do you need right now?" Not what are you going to do? Not I can't believe him. Just what do you need? I told her I didn't know yet. She said, "Okay, I'll come over." She came over and we sat at the kitchen table after the children were in bed, and she helped me think through the immediate questions. Did the children know? No. Did anyone else know? I didn't think so. What did I want the next week to look like? This was the question that stopped me, because I realized I had been so focused on the betrayal itself that I hadn't yet asked myself what I actually wanted to do with it. And that question turned out to be much more complicated than I expected. I confronted James the following evening. The children were at Patricia's for a sleepover she had arranged on the pretense of a movie night. I waited until James had come home and had dinner and was sitting in the living room, and then I went and sat across from him and I placed the second phone on the coffee table between us. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and everything in his face collapsed at once, not gradually, but all at the same time, like a structure whose supports all gave way simultaneously. He said my name. I said, "Don't." What followed was 2 hours of the most painful conversation of my life, more painful than the death of my grandfather, more painful than the miscarriage I had between Marcus and Una that James and I had never fully talked about. He cried, which I had not seen him do in years and which I found, to my own surprise, not touching but alienating. His tears felt to me like they were about his own pain at being discovered rather than about mine at being deceived. Though I recognized even in that moment that this might not be entirely fair, he told me he was sorry. He told me it had meant nothing, which I told him immediately was something he should not say to me because it was either a lie or it meant that he had been capable of sustained deception for over a year for something that meant nothing, and I didn't know which of those was worse. He said he wanted to fix it. He said he would end it, had already ended it, had been trying to find a way to tell me.